Rarely has a livestream promised so much and in return sparked so much debate. On its face, the Honkai Star Rail version 3.4 special program was a showcase of a developer at the peak of its confidence. It had a dream collaboration with one of the most beloved franchises in anime history, the stunning debut of a new character with animations that push the boundaries of the game, and the long-awaited arrival of a key quality of life feature. For a few hours, the community was united in universal excitement. The hype was palpable. A few hours of near total agreement on the internet is, you have to admit, a new record. And yet, in the hours and days that followed, that unified excitement began to fracture. The initial praise was met with a rising wave of criticism. Discussions surrounding the patch's monetization, its content structure, and the developer's communication strategy grew more and more heated, leaving the community deeply divided. So how did a patch that looked perfect on paper become one of the most controversial in the game's recent history? What lies beneath the surface of the spectacle? Let's get into it.
I am the bone of my sword, with soul in my throat and Kurobots in my blood. I've uploaded over 100 videos, unaware of women nor aware of social life. Withstood common sense to create content, waiting for Tecto's recognition. I have no regrets. This is the only path. My whole life was a limited glaze works.
So let's start with the promise of version 3.4, because on the surface, what we were shown was, without exaggeration, framed as the biggest patch in Star Rail's history. And for a moment, it was easy to believe. The presentation led with Phainon, and it is hard to overstate the level of spectacle here. The animations were immediately a cut above, less like a new playable character, and more like we're being given the keys to a weekly boss. The scale of his abilities, the dimension-slicing attacks, and now famous ultimate. It was described by some as absolute cinema, and that is not far off. It was a clear statement of intent, a showcase of pure unrestrained design that commanded attention. And then there was the collaboration. For months, the Fate-Stay Night crossover was the subject of endless speculation, and here it was, finally arriving. The trailer showed Saber and Archer not just as models dropped into the world, but seemingly integrated directly into the Penacony storyline. We saw a brief electrifying glimpse of Lancer, which sent a shockwave of excitement through the community, followed by a quiet collective prayer for his survival this time around. And to top it all off, a free Archer was guaranteed for everyone. In a landscape of often complicated gacha announcements, this was a simple, undisputed win. And finally, they announced the one thing the community has been asking for a really long time: a dialogue skip button. A truly groundbreaking piece of technology. I know, we're also getting buffs for older characters. And at that moment in the livestream, there was a near universal sense of approval. It felt like the developers were listening, delivering a massive, hype-filled patch with new characters, a dream collaboration, and the single most requested quality of life feature. On paper, it was perfect. The initial promise was that of a game firing on all cylinders, delivering on every possible front. But that feeling of perfect alignment didn't last long. In fact, it only lasted a few hours. After the live stream concluded, a clarification was posted online regarding the dialogue skip, and it turned out the feature wasn't quite the universal solution everyone had celebrated. The scope was limited. It would apply to the new 3.4 content and the main Trailblaze missions from previous patches, yes, but for all the other side missions, companion quests, and the event dialogue, essentially a massive portion of the game's text, that functionality wouldn't arrive until version 3.6. In gacha game terms, that is about 2 patches, but in Honkai Star Rail terms, that is about 3 new meta shifts and at least 2 fan-favorite characters being power crept from now. And the frustration that followed wasn't just about impatience, it was about a reoccurring pattern. It is this feeling of being given something with one hand only to have caveats and conditions attached by the other. A clear win is suddenly turned into a complicated compromise, and it creates this sense of deflation. It is the one step forward, one step back approach to community management that undermines the goodwill generated by the initial announcement. What makes this even more curious is that, for those who had been paying close attention, this limited scope wasn't even new information. It had already been mentioned in a prior developer radio blog post, so its inclusion in the livestream presented presented as a major headline feature without the full context, it felt strange. It retroactively looked less like a triumphant reveal and more like an attempt to pad the runtime with a known half-measure solution. And this single issue, as minor as it may seem in the grand scheme of the patch, was the first crack in the facade. It set the tone for how the rest of the details would be scrutinized, and that scrutiny quickly shifted from quality of life features to the patch's monetization, where a series of decisions began to paint a very particular picture. The first point of friction was the collaboration banner itself. It was announced that the pity for the Fate characters would be entirely separate from the existing limited banners. Any pity you had built up wouldn't carry over. In effect, this creates a siloed ecosystem. Basically, it isolates your existing investment and ensures that any desire for Saber or Archer requires a dedicated fresh pool of resources starting from zero. It is a subtle but significant way to wall off the new content from a player's long-term planning. And then there was the matter of the quote-unquote free light cone for Archer, a shining beacon of the developer's generosity. The only catch for this free gift was the small matter of spending 200 special passes on the limited banners during the 3.4 patch cycle. Now, to break it all down, a standard free-to-play player earns, on average, about 70 to 90 pulls per patch. The math simply doesn't add up without either months of dedicated saving or spending money. This is a classic FOMO mechanic, a design that pressures players who get close, say 170 or 180 pulls, to close the gap with their wallet rather than let the free rewards expire. Now that is horrible, but you know, let's move on to the character buffs, which were presented with a fascinating duality. On one hand, several older characters like Silverwolf, Kafka, and Blade received significant and welcome improvements. In a vacuum, this is a clear positive for the game's health, but when you look closer at the nature of these buffs, a pattern emerges. Key characters were specifically changed to scale with HP, and it just so happens that the game's premier HP scaling supports were conveniently featured on the rerun banners this very same patch. This has led many to perceive it less as a simple balance update and more as a very shrewd, synergistic business decision designed to encourage pulling for those specific supports to maximize the potential of the newly buffed characters. And finally, as if to put a fine point on the entire topic, there was a new paid skin for Firefly. The community reception was almost universally negative.
Is that not the same thing?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a buckshot. Don't buy this skin.
It's this. They just turned the brightness up. Okay, well, skip. Garbage ass skin, terrible.
Citing it as a low-effort design with barely any noticeable changes beyond a small brooch. Perhaps the most telling detail, however, was that its official showcase trailer was all of 10 seconds long. It is difficult to interpret that as anything other than a quiet internal admission that there wasn't much to show. But if we set aside the monetization for a moment and look purely at the content of the patch, we find another kind of imbalance, not one of cost, but of substance. There is no denying the quality of the main attractions. The new Trailblaze continuance in Amphorius and Phainon's story chapter are, by all accounts, expertly crafted. The new area itself is gorgeous, a welcome change of pace, and a clear showcase of the art team's considerable talents. This is the premium, high-quality story content that players expect from the game, and in this, the developers delivered. The problem arises when you ask the question, once that story is finished, what is there to do? The answer for the entirety of version 3.4 is not much. The patch contains a staggering 2 total events. Wow, mind-breaking. Honestly, 2 is too much. Honkai Star Rail should have no events, so we can play the game casually. But in all seriousness, this continues a well-documented trend where the game feels vibrant and full for the first week of a patch, followed by several weeks of relative silence. It is a feast and famine model that leaves the game feeling sparse and hollow for long stretches. This feeling of stagnation is compounded by a larger structural issue. The game has not released a new 4-star character in over a year, which, for context, is enough time to farm 1, maybe 2 decent relics if you're lucky. For a live service game built on character collection, this is a significant choice. It freezes team building possibilities for low-spending players, making it increasingly difficult to form new viable teams without pulling for limited 5 stars. Over time, it creates a top-heavy roster, where all the innovation and excitement is reserved for the most premium units. And even among those premium units, the execution feels inconsistent. This patch gives us Phainon, a character whose kit represents a massive leap in power and a spectacle in itself. At the same time, it gives us Saber, the headliner of a legendary collaboration, whose kit, except the ultimate Excalibur, was widely described by critics as uninspired and mechanically boring. It showcases a strange disparity in design focus, where one new character feels like a meta-defining event and another feels almost like an afterthought. So when you take all of this into account, the cinematic highs, the questionable business decisions, the fulfilled promises, and the broken ones, what exactly is version 3.4? In many ways, this patch feels like a microcosm of the entire HSR experience right now. It is a game that is capable of delivering unparalleled spectacle and genuinely compelling narrative moments, yet it is a game that is increasingly shadowed by its own aggressive monetization and a community strategy that often feels out of step with its player base. This isn't a simple good or bad patch. To call it either would be a disservice to the complexity of the situation. It is a package of incredible artistic achievement bundled with some of the most transparently questionable business decisions we have seen from the developers. They are clearly pushing the boundaries of what is possible in animation and character design, but at the same time, they seem to be aggressively testing the boundaries of player goodwill. And that leads to the real central question this patch forces us to ask. It is no longer just, is the content good question mark? The answer to that is, for the most part, yes. The real question is whether the price of admission, both literal and figuratively, is becoming too high. As a showcase of what this game can be, version 3.4 is an undeniable success, but as a holistic player respecting update, it leaves a great deal to be desired. So this patch really highlighted that clear conflict between content quality and monetization strategy. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Where do you draw the line? Let me know in the comments down below. But that is all from me, Glaivekiyo, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!